When Metal Gear Solid: The Master Collection Volume 1 was announced in 2023, fans rejoiced. They could finally play some of the best games ever created on their modern hardware, especially after some of these games were absent from the digital market for almost 2 years, like Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3. The announcement led fans to wonder about the possibility of Volume 2 in the future, because why would Konami call it Volume 1 unless they planned for a Volume 2 and possibly 3? And what Metal Gear games would Volume 2 include? One specific game was the first thing that popped into fans' minds. A game that fans has been wondering about and anticipating for a long time. A game that fans has been praying to be released from the prison known as the PlayStation 3. And that game is never dead. Sorry. I mean Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots. Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots, released in 2008, was a major exclusive title for the PlayStation 3. Developed by Kojima Productions at Konami and directed by Hideo Kojima. It capitalized on the PlayStation 3's advanced hardware to deliver stunning graphics, intricate gameplay mechanics, and an immersive narrative experience. Its exclusivity was a significant draw for the PlayStation 3 platform, showcasing the console capabilities and solidifying its position in the competitive gaming market. The decision to keep Metal Gear Solid 4 exclusive to the PlayStation 3 also highlighted a strong partnership between Konami and Sony, driving dedicated fans of the series to invest in the console itself. To this day, the concept that Metal Gear Solid 4 remained exclusive to the PlayStation 3 since 2008 is utterly amazing, especially when you consider that during that period, other big games which initially thought to be exclusive to the PlayStation platform ended up releasing on a competitive one like the Xbox 360 on day one. Back then, big games from third-party companies used to release first on the PlayStation platforms. Then, few months to a year later, it will get a release to other platforms. It was a short-term exclusivity without a contract, and this was a big advantage to the PlayStation brand, as Sony didn't need to do anything to attract the publishers to their consoles. Then suddenly Microsoft showed up and strategically started making deals with third-party companies to break this exclusivity norms that used to give an advantage to the PlayStation. Microsoft targeted some of the biggest games within the video game industry. Games like Grand Theft Auto 4, Final Fantasy XIII, and Resident Evil 5, franchises that flourished within the PlayStation ecosystem, were no longer exclusive on PlayStation 3 day one. Microsoft even went further and paid some of these publishers to have these games released on day one on the Xbox 360. This was so common back in 2007 and 2008 that people thought Metal Gear Solid 4 would be the next game to have its exclusivity broken and be released to Xbox 360 as well. People start even doing jokes and memes about it. But that didn't happen. The game has stayed exclusive to this day. I remember there was a podcast with Kojima back in 2007 where he mentioned about the reason why Metal Gear Solid 4 will not come to Xbox 360 due to the console's disc size. The Xbox 360 used DVD-9 disc format, which could hold up to 8.5 GB compared to the PlayStation 3, which used Blu-ray discs that could hold up to 25 GB for a single layer, with the capacity to have up to 4 layers, allowing for 100 GB of data. Of course, I don't think that was the only reason. I believe Sony had a hand in that. They couldn't sit idle and watch games that used to be released first to their consoles slip to their competitors. So they struck a deal with Konami and Kojima to keep the game exclusive to the PlayStation 3. That was a great decision at the time, but the world was different back then. Years later, we can now sense how bad of a decision that was. Fast forward to 2011, Metal Gear Solid: The HD Collection was announced, which include Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. They were released later that year on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. This was a huge deal back then, as there hadn't been a single Metal Gear game on Xbox platforms since Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance back in 2002. People thought that Metal Gear Solid 4 would join them later, but that didn't happen. Thanks to the release of the HD collection for the Xbox 360, the games within it received backward compatibility patch in 2018 for the newer generations of Xbox consoles. Meanwhile, PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 did not get these games at all due to the lack of backward compatibility with PlayStation 3 games. Also, thanks to the fact that these games were released on Xbox 360, it made it easier to port them as part of the Master Collection Volume 1, as Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 uses the ports of the Xbox 360 HD versions of these games, unlike other games in the collection which uses emulation. But with Metal Gear Solid 4, that is a completely different story. Unfortunately, because of the exclusivity deal with Sony, Hideo Kojima and Konami ensured that the game would stay exclusive to Sony's console, the PlayStation 3, and they made it almost impossible to port or re-release the game to other modern hardware. Allow me to elaborate. Unlike porting Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3, porting Metal Gear Solid 4 is not as straightforward as people might think. It would require a massive amount of money and resources to properly port or remaster the game for modern hardware. There are significant issues that Konami need to address and find a solution for if they want to release Metal Gear Solid 4 from the prison that is called the PlayStation 3. And you might be thinking, it's probably the engine, which relies on the PlayStation 3 cell architecture. And that is true. However, there are issues far beyond the engine itself when it comes to porting it to modern hardware. Metal Gear Solid 4 was developed using a custom engine that relies on a cell architecture of the PlayStation 3, which was notoriously difficult to work with. And as I remember during the development of Metal Gear Solid 4, Sony had to send some of their developers to Konami to teach them how to effectively utilize the PlayStation 3 cell architecture. Despite this support, the game was not properly optimized upon release. It didn't even operate at 720p HD. It was operating at a sub-HD and suffered from significant frame drops. To mitigate some of these issues, Konami had to use in-game engine video formats for some of the cinematics, such as the infamous scene where Liquid takes control of the system. Ever wondered why there were no frame drops despite the complexity of that scene? It is because it's actually a pre-rendered video. Every Metal Gear Solid game since the first one has used in-game engine cutscenes, with a few exceptions for full-motion videos for narrative purposes. Metal Gear Solid 4 was the first to use pre-rendered videos for some of the in-game engine cutscenes, which is a pretty much testament to the challenges posed by the cell architecture of the PlayStation 3. I would bet the PlayStation 3 would melt if these scenes were rendered in real time in-game. It wasn't until 2009 that developers in the video game industry finally fully figured out the cell architecture and were able to utilize its full power in their games to its full potential. And this has reminded me of an article I read back in 2012. I can't seem to find it now, but from what I remember, it discussed how poorly optimized Metal Gear Solid 4 was due to the lack of understanding of the cell architecture. If Metal Gear Solid 4 had been delayed and released by the end of 2009 or early 2010, the game would have likely performed better compared to its original release in 2008. And if the game had also been released to the Xbox 360, the game's performance would have been significantly better compared to the PlayStation 3. Despite all of that, Metal Gear Solid 4 features some amazing visuals thanks to its strong art direction. These visuals have indeed stood the test of time well. It's almost magical how the game operates given how rough the cell architecture is, with no game-breaking bugs or crashes. Imagine being able to experience these visuals at a higher resolution and a higher frame rate, surpassing what the PlayStation 3 could offer. So yeah, dealing with the cell architecture would be a nightmare for porting the game, but it is not impossible. Look at how many PlayStation 3 games ended up being ported or remastered for the PlayStation 4. Games like the Uncharted series, The Last of Us, God of War 3, and many more. They all got higher frame rates, better resolution, and improved visuals overall. There is no reason why Metal Gear Solid 4 can't get the same treatment as these games and be ported as well. But keep in mind, porting these games were not an easy task. Back in 2014, I read a tweet from one of the developers of The Last of Us talking about their experience porting the game from the PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4. It took them 14 months to properly port the game, and The Last of Us was made by Naughty Dog, one of Sony's bigger studios and pioneers in graphics and game development. So, here's the problem. Konami is in charge here, and based how they poorly handled the Master Collection Volume 1, I am not confident they can do a good job. porting and re-releasing Metal Gear Solid 4 will not be a cakewalk. Like I said earlier, it will require a massive amount of money and resources to properly port or remaster the game for modern hardware. Considering the poor launch of the Master Collection Volume 1 in 2023, which was plagued by numerous bugs and issues, some of which Konami are still addressing to this day, it is very clear they are struggling even with basic issues like the game being locked at 720p resolution, which was quickly resolved by the PC modding community within an hour of a release. It's been 10 months since the launch, and Konami is taking their sweet-ass time with fixes. I guess that's what happened when you hire an incompetent developer. So, based on that, do you think Konami can afford the time and resources to handle the porting process for Metal Gear Solid 4 and release it to multiple platforms? Do you feel they will be able to do a proper job? Only Konami can answer these questions. But aside from the technical and graphical aspects of porting the game to modern hardware, there is something else that many people are forgetting. Legal issues that Konami need to figure out as a company. Specifically, there are licensed content issues within Metal Gear Solid 4 that need addressing. In my opinion, I think licensed content are dumb, stupid, and a plague in the video game industry, especially if they are completely meaningless and does not add anything to the experience. Of course, there are games where it benefits from the inclusion of licensed content. But my issue here stems from the lack of commitment from the publisher towards these licensed content. I want to ask this question. If you are not going to commit to renewing license you have paid for, why include licensed content in your games at all? Why not create your own content instead of relying on others? How many games have been pulled from the digital storefronts due to expired licenses? Let's take a recent and clear example you are likely familiar with. Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 were removed from the digital storefronts in November 2021. The reason? The licenses for the historic archival footage used in both games had expired. These iconic titles vanished from the PlayStation 3 network, PlayStation Vita network, Xbox Marketplace, Nvidia Shield, and PC GOG store for Metal Gear Solid 2. Imagine two of the greatest games of all times become unavailable for purchase digitally anywhere because Konami didn't renew these licenses. It wasn't until May 24th, 2023 during the PlayStation Showcase that Konami finally announced the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1. This collection included Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 with some adjustments made to the licensed content within the games. It turns out Konami had to remove the games due to 4 footages whose original companies no longer existed, and Konami couldn't locate the current owners. So, out of fear of risking a potential lawsuits, the games were pulled from the digital market. The Master Collection was released on October 24th, 2023, nearly 2 years after these games were pulled from digital storefronts. But guess what? That is not the end of the story. When the HD collection was released in 2011, Konami only renewed the licenses for the archival footage for 10 years. And that blows my mind even more. Konami knew these licenses would expire someday, but didn't take action. This means the same issue could repeat itself when these licenses expire again in the future. Whether in 10, 15, or 20 years, who knows? This wouldn't have happened if only Konami had produced their own content instead of relying on licensed material, and you will not have to deal with the headache of keeping an eye on them. It is these licensed content is what prevent games from remaining on digital storefronts or being ported or remastered once licenses expire. And thanks to these licensed contents, many older iconic games can no longer be played or purchased due to the expiration of licenses and publisher refusal to renew them. Anyone remember Outrun 2? One of my favorite arcade racing games of all times? I wonder why it's no longer available for purchase. Alright, it's because the license to use Ferrari cars expired, and I don't think Sega have the intentions or the resources to renew it. And sometimes money is not the issue. Sometimes it is the legal complications that can happen to a game which prevent the publishers from doing anything with it. And you might be wondering, what all this has to do with Metal Gear Solid 4? Well, Metal Gear Solid 4 is jam-packed with licensed content. Let's start with the biggest, most obvious example, the iPod. Yes, the same iPod that Apple released back then. In the game, you can use the iPod to listen to music and even tune into a special episode of Metal Gear Solid 4 Integral Podcast.
And now, Metal Gear Solid 4 Integral Podcast.
Also, you can see Otacon uses Apple computers and monitors, and in Act 5, he's seen using an Apple laptop. Now imagine Konami approaching Apple, one of the biggest companies in the world with a market value of $3 trillion, to renew the licenses of these products in the game. That would be funny, right? Apple would likely demand a huge fee, maybe around 50 million. Yeah, good luck with that, Konami. There are also Playboy magazines. I don't know why they have decided to license that in the first place. Couldn't they have used local Japanese models like they did in Metal Gear Solid 2? Why did Kojima think it was necessary to include a brand that doesn't really add value to the game? Maybe they had extra money and they need to spend it somehow. There's also the Regain 24 energy drink, which seems to be nothing more than a product placement advertising. And I believe some of the weapons names in the game are also licensed, though I'm not entirely sure about this. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And finally, you have Sony's products all over the game, starting with the DualShock 3 controller. And yes, the DualShock 3 sucks. If you control the Metal Gear Mark II and take a look at Snake's hand, you will notice he is holding a DualShock 3 controller. And in the Nomad, the airplane that Snake and Otacon travel aboard, you can find a PlayStation 3 in the room where Sunny stays. Sometimes, you can even spot Sunny playing with a PSP. Also, remember the infamous Kodak call from Otacon when you hit to the blast furnace in Shadow Moses? Here, I'll let it play.
Hold it, Snake. Time to change the disc. I know, it's a pain. But you need to swap disc 1 for disc 2. You see the disc labeled 2?
No.
Huh? Oh, wait. We're on PlayStation 3. It's a Blu-ray disc. Dual layered, too. No need to swap.
Damn it, Otacon! Get a grip!
Yeah, what an age we live in, huh, Snake? Wonder what they'll think of next.
As you guys can see, in order for Metal Gear Solid 4 to come to modern hardware, Konami needs to address the licensed content within the game by diving into the game's code to either rebrand them or remove them completely from the game. Or, Konami could negotiate with the owners of the licensed content to renew their agreements, but I am skeptical that Konami will pursue this option. Like I said, licensed content sucked, but it can be resolved if Konami is willing to put in the effort. They could port the game from the PlayStation 3 cell's architecture and address all these licensed elements within Metal Gear Solid 4. By doing this, it would pave the way for a release on modern hardware. But there's one problem, and it is something I don't think you, my friend, will like. Let me ask you a question. Do you truly want Metal Gear Solid 4 to come to modern hardware? Before you answer, I want you to pause this video and think about this question really well. Be honest to yourself. If Konami invested resources and money to bring this game to modern hardware, would you purchase it on day one at full price? And by the way, I don't think Konami will sell this game at a cheap price, given the amount of work required to port the game to modern hardware. Just like how the individual games on the Master Collection Volume 1 were being sold for $20 each, Konami probably gonna charge $40 for Metal Gear Solid 4 alone at the very least. And because of that, I don't even think they will bundle Metal Gear Solid 4 as part of the Master Collection Volume 2, if that will exist in the future. And if they did end up bundling it as part of Volume 2, I don't think the other included games within Volume 2 will be much of a value unlike Volume 1. So, I will ask again, would you get Metal Gear Solid 4 in your favorite hardware on day one? Or will you wait for a sale? Or perhaps you're not planning to get the game at all? And let's be real here. You might think you want this game, but in reality, you might not. It is just that you are frustrated that Metal Gear Solid 4 is stuck on the PlayStation 3 and you want it to be free from it. What you really want isn't just the game itself, but the convenience of access. You want it within your reach so you can jump in whenever you are in the mood for it. And I have talked to a lot of people in regards of this matter, and they all share a similar sentiment. They appreciate having the game available, but they are not necessarily eager to play it. Apart from the hardcore fans of the series who will likely get the game on day one, I don't think casual players are particularly interested in the broken mess that is called Metal Gear Solid 4. Let's face it, unlike its predecessors, Metal Gear Solid 4 is not a great game, and that is the sad, ugly truth that most people seems to ignore. Metal Gear Solid 4 is a very flawed game. It has a lot of design issues that cannot be fixed no matter what. These include a broken balance between cutscenes and gameplay, a slow pace due to frequent cutscene interruptions, questionable retcons, a massive drop in gameplay quality after Act 2, and the unappealing nature of the gameplay itself. You play with a very old man where he can barely stand on his feet, and the gameplay resolved around the mechanics of playing with an old man. His movements, his attacks, his CQC, his rolls where he sometimes get a back pain from it. Although they are intentional aspects of the game design, it is so unappealing to the casual audience, unlike the smooth, agile movements of Venom Snake in the Phantom Pain, for example. And guess what? Konami knows that too well. That's why they haven't dropped any hints about bringing Metal Gear Solid 4 to modern hardware. It is not worth it. And as a hardcore fan of the series, I can easily see why it wouldn't be worth putting in all that money and effort to bring the game to modern hardware. And don't get me wrong, I really want to see Metal Gear Solid 4 on modern hardware, enjoying the game in a higher resolution, steady 60 FPS, better image quality, and overall improved performance. This is a game that won multiple Game of the Year awards in 2008 and significantly boosted the PlayStation 3 sales worldwide upon release. But realistically, the odds are against it. Konami is a business, and from what I can tell with Metal Gear Solid 4, the investment might not be worth it for them. However, I could be completely wrong, and Konami might surprise us. It all depends on whether they are willing to invest in winning back fans and rebuilding trust, whatever it takes. It is a tough road, and if they decided to step back, I wouldn't blame them. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.